From the Dallas On Air studios in beautiful Dallas, Texas, this is FulFILMment right here on DallasOnAir.com. And now here's your host, the Mega Bomber, PJ Dunn.
Welcome everybody to the FulFILMment Show. This is the show where we're going to discuss all things films. We're going to talk about the director, the director's mama, the cousins, and that infidelity they had that one time that no one else knows about, but we've read somewhere on the internet, so therefore it must be true. So what I'm going to have today is a special round table because we're going to actually sit down and talk about something. You know, we're going to not rank this week. We're going to actually talk about a topic that I find extremely interesting. So let me describe who's here with me today. And so we have our special contributor back. That is Horror Mike.
Hey, how's it going, Internet Land?
Yes.
Always fun to be back. Love hanging out with you guys.
Yeah, we love having you here too, and they like it too. And of course, you remember we had Chris on before, and we were able to kind of get him back, wrangle him back into the fold, and he's here today.
Nice to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, love it. And of course, I couldn't do any of this without my trusty co-host, who's behind the camera, sometimes in front of the camera, but there's a camera somewhere around. That's Kazak.
Greetings and salutations, campers. Welcome to DallasOnAir.com.
And I am your movie tour guide, the Vega Bomber. So let me just start with a quick thesis, and we're going to jump right into the topic. So if you get to see this later, you'll know that the topic is Marvel fatigue a thing? Marvel specifically, but you could say superhero movies in general. And if so, what could Marvel do about it? So let me just start off with just a thesis statement, and then we're going to dive right in, gentlemen, and just see what we can find out today. Yep. So essentially, the Marvel movies, and again, superhero movies in general, have become redundant tropes within themselves, with too many exhausting examples of mediocrity where I feel like they could be great. And I love to see things be great. So how many more films then, at the rate that they're being released, are going to also suffer from this mediocrity when there could be some true greatness? So we have the first Avengers, we have Cap, Winter Soldier, and Civil War that were pretty good. We know of Spider-Man No Way Home, and there's a few others. But when you look at how many have been released, can you say they were all as good as those films? And that should be something. So what we're seeing is a completely formulaic structure that seems to not be deviated no matter what almost. We see that one of the ideas is that every lead character has to be the funny guy and has to have all the quips, even though that's not germane to their character at all, in the way people may have read them in the comic books. And that doesn't necessarily mean that has to be that way, but it is something that we're used to. And so if we're doing all of that at some point, and at the rate that they're coming out, how are we not going to be able to get tired of that? We saw what happened to Westerns. We saw what happened to other genres, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So if this is as rampant as what we think it is, and we're going to discuss that now, what will Marvel do will be the B part to this. But just off the top, and I'll go with you first, Horror Mike, and Chris certainly jump in, and certainly Kazak too. I don't want to forget you over there to my left as I'm looking to my right.
Yep.
Mike, is it a thing?
Oh, 100%. We've seen almost every genre. This is a Hollywood trope, right? Hollywood loves taking whatever is popular and just beating it down, beating it to the ground. I do remember there's only one genre that's kind of proof to this, and that's the horror genre. And that's just because they're usually historically made so cheap, they can always go under the radar, and horror fans tend to be more rabid for it. But again, horror is the only example I can think of where if you follow these tropes pretty hard, they tend to love it more. Otherwise, every single genre that has gotten popular failed. And I believe the superhero genre, I believe Steven Spielberg said this. He said it's going to be the next Western.
And he's not wrong. I mean, every genre goes through cycles. I mean, if you look at like the late 80s or the 80s and then somewhat into the 90s, the action movie was pretty solid up until probably around 2000, 2001, roughly that point, or maybe 2003. But then these always go in waves. Like you have the 70s with the gritty urban crime thrillers that were the mainstay of the action, like maybe a subset almost, like your Bullets, your Dirty Harry series, that sort of thing, until the idea becomes the institution.
Yes.
The Westerns were, Spielberg was right, the Western is the same thing. The Western technically was reinvented as an urban construct with action movies. For that reason. And again, they always go in waves because the Western even came back, but as more Oscar-winning fare like Dances with Wolves or Wyatt Earp. Those
310 to Yuma.
Yeah, the grandiose.
Grit. True Grit, yeah.
True Grit came back, but it's in radical spurts, but they're being very sparing with it. And to answer the question of what can Marvel do, it's the one thing they won't do, because to your point, Mike, they need to slow down.
Yep.
They really need to slow down, but they're not going to do that because the business machine that it has become, they're feeding the beast, and if they don't, it becomes a challenge for them. And it shouldn't be a problem for Disney. I mean, Disney is the worst at doing this because they go to the
Moderation.
They go to the well all these many times. I mean, these live action versions of their big animated hits, sequels to their animated hits in the decades prior.
Yeah.
Disney does this. There used to be an old show business adage of leave them wanting more.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
Disney has forgotten that because what they learned out of, like, back in the video days of when they would take their animated movies and we're going back into the Disney vault, so you only have a limited time to see this. That was leaving them wanting more. But the problem was it wasn't making them money, and people would forget about them. So now in a fast food ADHD cell phone world like we've got, it's like they want to keep feeding the consumer. So the real, solution for any of this lies with the consumer and what we choose to spend our dollar on.
Good point.
It always does. What were you going to say, Zach?
Well, what I was going to say was where Disney succeeded with Marvel, they failed with Star Wars.
Oh yeah, no
Because when you came in, we were supposed to get a Star Wars movie every year, and then they tried to jump the gun, and then they tried to do the series, and it overwhelmed your audience. It gave them too much content, not all of it good, and not enough space for it to be in. What Marvel has been trying to do to succeed is keep their name in the cultural zeitgeist. And every 6 weeks, there's something new that you can't miss.
Yep.
And because their marketing machine is now powering it, rather than the creatives, you're starting to run it into the ground.
So that leads to my point. I think you looked it up, the infographic I found, and this was very startling to me. And I think it really drills to the point. And this happened on a actually so shockingly a smaller scale with Star Wars, which is shocking to me because I felt Star Wars was everywhere. This is just by the numbers more. There's MCU phases by runtime, okay? Phase 1's over the course of 5 years, okay? Those movies combined total up over 5 years, 12 hours of content. That means people had time to think about the movies, digest them. I remember Iron Man and even Incredible Hulk, which I love that people have now, with She-Hulk being a thing, gone back to that movie. They've taken a step back and said, let's relook at that Edward Norton one. Because I remember that movie wasn't panned. That's not fair. It wasn't panned by any stretch of imagination, but there were so much good films.
Like the Ang Lee one.
Yeah, like Ang Lee wasn't. Your mileage may vary. It's not a strong movie at all.
Right.
I argue
awful.
The Incredible Hulk is a pretty good movie.
Yeah.
And
for certain.
Yeah, and I remember people walked out. I was like, hey, that was pretty good. It wasn't bad. But again, we had like The Dark Knight that year. We had Iron Man like a month ago. Boy, we were spoiled with just so many great films that just a pretty good movie felt. If that Incredible Hulk had come out today, it'd be one of the biggest superhero movies of the year. Because it was a quality control and more focus on things. It feels like things are more. I'm not going to say that they aren't being focused on. There's no quality in the movies. There's clearly special effects and money being put into them, but it feels like they're just scattershot out. So I want to go back to the little infographic I have. Phase 1, 6 movies, 12 hours of content. Phase 2, over the course of 3 years, 12 hours of content. Okay, now we're tightening it up. Phase 3, 2 years. We now have 11. This is when Disney gets it. This is now 11 films, and it's 24 hours of content. Now, 1 year. This is 1 year, 2021. Phase 4 is 50 hours of content, 49.5 hours. This is including
counting movies and TV series.
This is including movies and TV shows. Yeah. So far, by the way, because this goes up to Love and Thunder. This doesn't include She-Hulk. This doesn't include
Ms.
Wakanda
Marvel.
Forever. This doesn't include Miss Marvel.
Yeah.
Humans can't do that. Like, there's too much to watch. That Star Wars theory guy, he was just saying, he's like, thank God this is my full-time job because there's so much Star Wars. I have to read the books. I've got to read he wasn't complaining. He's just saying, it's like, y'all don't get how much Star Wars there is right now. There is more Star Wars in this last 3 or 4 years than there was his entire fandom. I think he's like 40, so he's been a 40+ year fan of Star Wars.
Yep.
And he's never had this much stuff. Humans can only, and then it's that there's not quality to it. Like, you can only just take so much.
Because you can't. So if you're going to put out that much content, what you're now going to be a slave to is time frames. And things don't always go down the way you want. How many times have a house been built? It was supposed to be finished at a certain time, but because they didn't have lumber or something else and it slowed it down, where they're saying, no, just get it done however the best way you can. Oh, the CGI is shoddy? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We'll still get this film out, Black Panther, with the fight scene at the end, right? Yep. You're also seeing something that's like supposed to be the best thing about these films, the CGI and the fight scenes. And they're not, because you have this schedule that says, well, we have to come out at this time because Jurassic Park's coming out at this time and another major tentpole's coming out this time. And we don't want to come out during that month because obviously then we're kind of working against ourselves. So we have to have it right here at this time, even though the product is maybe 2/3 of the way finished. Figure out a way to get it done. Now, sometimes that can be great, but if you're always in crisis mode, you'll get to the point where you'll say, good enough, move on. GMO. And that hurts the quality of the films.
It does. That's the problem is that's the business model is you're when you're constantly under the gun to get there ahead of your competition. But I think Phil Tippett, maybe I'm wrong on this, but Phil Tippett was recently quoted as saying that if you're managing it from a business perspective, and I'm paraphrasing this badly, but if you're managing it from a business perspective, you're really missing the art. And if you don't manage artists, you don't get that quality. And that's why it's interesting now, in counterpoint to Marvel, that DC, there's been this big shakeup over at Warner Brothers because they merged with Discovery, and so they're canceling movies and taking tax write-offs off, movies like Batgirl, where people, put their heart and soul into making this thing, but it didn't test well. So they're saying, okay, we're not going to spend over the 80 or 90 we spent, 90 million, to finish this thing and get it out. And we're delaying movies that were supposed to open this year as far into 2023. Like recently, they delayed. They were going to have Shazam open in December, the Shazam sequel, and then Aquaman 2 open in March. Now that's flipped. Aquaman 2 opens in December of 2023, and Shazam's opening in March. So they're flipped back again. Plus, there's these little problems of the celebrities that are in these movies. And their personal issues, which really shouldn't even be a problem. But let's face it, as in the history of Hollywood, when hasn't a celebrity problem affected the business?
Bingo. Yeah, that's fair.
So, but the fact that they're moving them out that far suggests that then maybe they're giving the CGI crews a lot more time. Because there's even a complaint now, I think I've read about recently, where the CGI teams are like, they're really pushing back on how hard they're being worked, sometimes almost in like unreasonable conditions in terms of like how many hours they work, how many breaks they have, and things like that. It's a madhouse because of them trying to meet those criteria that you just itemized.
Yeah, when you think about Feige coming out telling you, here's what we're going to be doing for the next 2 or 3 years, I don't know about you, but when somebody's got my life planned out that far in advance, I don't really have a say in it, and then you're going to keep going with the same theme because you're going to keep going back to the same cash grab formula that keeps working. How do you get excited about that? You're going to see more of the exact same crap, just it's a different person, a different Marvel character. And if we do that, the question could then be, does every Marvel character deserve a movie?
Yeah, and this could sound so. Here's one that I this is going to be a hot take.
Yep.
I don't think every character deserves one. But I think every character can. This goes back to a phrase. I know it from a more modern writer, but I know he's quoting someone else. Every character has at least one great story in them. There's no such thing as a bad character, just bad writers. I think the problem you're getting with a lot of the Marvel content right now is, and this goes to another point I wanted to make, it's an over-reliance on jokes and pop culture references, which has always been there. Let's not get it twisted. Like, these films have always had it.
Yeah.
But if you compare Phase 1 to Phase 4, it is references a minute. And there is no time to build up the characters. Famously, Edgar Wright, I have a belief that Ant-Man is that good because of the groundwork Edgar Wright put into it. Edgar Wright was a clear Ant-Man fan. I personally, if I had a choice between literally thousands upon thousands of Marvel characters, I wouldn't have picked Ant-Man in a million years. But Ant-Man is kind of proved to my point. That character had a good story to tell. It's that now Disney takes it from him. They then say, cool, now let's turn this into an oversaturated product. We're not focusing on his character anymore. We're just going to keep beating down on what's the new threat, what's the new pop culture reference, and it beats it all down.
So that
Yeah,
leads
and
me to some.
Actually, I want to go ahead and get in a point here too.
Yes.
Is that it's not that every character deserves a movie; it's that they're running out of characters to make a surprise. Because that's their ace card.
good way of looking at that,
You're
yeah.
looking at these characters and like, and I'm going to give some spoilers here. Why do I care about Adam Warlock? Why do I care
Right.
about Hercules?
Right.
Why do I care about whatever the guy was Harry Styles was playing at the end of Eternals? Why do I care? I don't. I don't. Because as to Mike's point, there's no build up for me to care about any of these characters.
These movies and products, because I'm within probably the 10-mile radius. There's probably not a bigger She-Hulk fan than me. I've got the.
I don't know.
appearance.
I love that show.
See,
I love that show, and I love what John Byrne did in the '80s, which they were directly referencing most of the
Bingo.
time, without being, Playboy After Dark about it.
Yeah. So here's this is my issue. And if you really look at I'm not gonna say discourse. There's another layer of discourse that I won't go into right now. But if you watch the show, people are more discussing the references to future things and not the story itself.
Yeah,
They are
that's true.
people are focusing on there's now more come and look at what's going to be coming next instead of what did you just see now. He brought up Eternals. Eternals has so much setup for the second Eternals. I felt they didn't have a hard focus on the first Eternals movie.
They didn't give you enough to care about those characters, and you're right. You really can't make your primary core content your trailer.
Yep.
I mean, if you want to give me a 2-hour trailer for the next Avengers, all you're doing is setting up a plan for next year, which, by the way, the strange thing about those plans is they're always very flexible about changing that. And planning out your life that far in advance, I'll tell you, as a consumer, from that perspective, I'm going to say, look, I have the right to say no. No, I'm not going to watch your 2-hour trailer. I mean,
About to happen too.
and that's their problem. What they won't do is they won't slow down and take a look at letting people enjoy what's there, because they've been trying to catch up for so many years of Marvel not having a dominant space here. But the idea has become the institution, and the name of the game now is reinvention. That's where I think DC has an actual edge, because they're already in the midst of trying to reinvent themselves.
And I love that they're trying to reinvent themselves, but they're going to reinvent themselves into what? Another Marvel version, but the DC version of it? I don't want to see that. Because, see, here's the thing, and I'll go back to that point. It goes back to Spider-Man, Sam Raimi. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And right now, Marvel's going, we can do this because we're on the top, because we're backed by Disney. And Disney owns everything. Disney prints stuff. Disney has their own island. They don't have their own Mount Rushmore, if you will, with their own characters on it, right? When you have that attitude and you come in, then you can't hear the voices of the smaller people who are saying, but that's not a creative choice right there that we're doing. We're just taking another character. And again, it's not a different story. I will argue that Ant-Man's not a different story than Iron Man 1 or Black Panther. It's a guy fighting another guy in a suit. It's still the same thing. And we are doing a few things differently. However, the net is still the same. And so whether DC gets it right or maybe the Spider-Man features with Sony and then Marvel, the problem is you're still telling the same damn story. You're just doing it with a different character. So at some point, you're going to exhaust. How many great stories can you tell at one time if you've got that many movies and TV shows and books and comics coming out all at once that someone goes, I have to do all of this just to watch a 1 hour and 45 minutes to 2 hour movie? Or when they really want to go crazy, I have to understand all of this in order to watch a 3-hour movie that I'm not going to go back and watch again because that's too many hours out of my life because you want me to watch all the other stuff that's on streaming and everywhere else. So how do I make time? So think about this. The early moviegoer never had to worry about that. That's why we could enjoy Raiders of the Lost Ark, Aliens, Star Wars, Jaws, Rocky. Think about that. We had the freedom to go, I'm going to watch a shark movie, then I'm going to watch a boxing movie, then I'm going to watch a Star Wars movie, then I'm going to watch a horror film that's set in space. Today, you don't get a chance to rest. It is, okay, now have you seen this one? Okay, now have you seen this one? Because it has this person from that last movie that was teasing that last one. Oh, you didn't read that? Well, you need to read the book. oh, you didn't get the toy? The toy already tells you by what's in the packaging who's going to be in the movie because the toy's already on the shelves and you can see who's in there. And so there's yet another issue. So when you're doing that, what you've said is, I expect you to drink from a water hose continuously. That's not what movies are supposed to be about.
And
Chris.
the business is forgetting the greatest point about that they're trying to make these movies to get butts in seats. It's not about the fans. It's never been about the fans to a business guy, some exec in LA. It's about getting the layperson who might be interested in the rest of this because somebody else might be interested in it, and they've got something compelling to show you. Arguably, whether or not that's compelling, that's the trick. But the biggest thing about that is that the layperson's not going to want to invest heavily like that Star Wars fan you told us about. That was my biggest problem with Star Wars. I don't want to have to go read a book to go understand what the rest of this movie is. My point is, I don't want to have to read a book to flesh out things that they should have had on screen.
Thank you. That's storytelling.
Well, here's and I'm
screenwriting.
That gets to my point. Now, me and Kazak, we both walked away pretty. And this is also, you're seeing this trend. How many reviews of Marvel products now? I was like, it's okay, it's fine, it's okay.
Meh.
It's meh. It's meh.
Turn
Marvel
your brain
meh.
off. Turn your brain off.
Because that's actually been my problem with like the She-Hulk show. I feel there's such a reliance and focus on Easter eggs and stuff like that
Oh, boy.
that you only have 30 minutes to tell this story. Actually, like 22 minutes, and
Maybe.
I would actually like more time with She-Hulk and building how she fits in this world than all these elements in this world.
Yes.
Potentially setting up the next movie. I feel because I'm gun shy now, thanks to this is what I was gonna say with Kazak, Multiverse of Madness. It's like, is this story with Emil Blonsky from The Incredible Hulk, is this going to pay off in She-Hulk, or am I going to have to wait for it to pay off in potentially Thunderbolts? And my gut tells me it's probably going to be the latter.
I hate to say it, but I think you're right.
And that's the problem. I shouldn't have that. That shouldn't even be in my head. That could be a possibility that a story won't finish in the story that it's started in. Multiverse of Madness, as okay as I thought it was, is hindered by the fact if you didn't watch WandaVision. What's the biggest criticism with that movie? People were like, you
don't understand the villain.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't understand why it's villain here. And it's like, and then the worst part is, had you watched WandaVision, she doesn't make sense. And then if you watch, her from the end of that show to the beginning of that movie is a weird disconnect. And then if you go back and try to watch it, you're like, well, wait a minute, how does this connect to Multiverse Man? Doctor Strange not even in this show. Yeah. And you're punishing people for not watching all these products, but then they're not connecting in what I argue is a natural way.
And I think that's a real downturn that they've taken in the storytelling because they're pumping so much of this out, is that you don't have time to build sympathy or empathy or anything for understanding not only of the heroes, but the threats and the villains. I couldn't tell you who the villain was in Captain Marvel anymore.
Oh yeah,
I understood Thanos' meaning, but I didn't understand like why his crew followed him. There's so much there that I would have to go back and read the books to understand why they're following him, because they didn't deliver that meaning in the movies. And because I don't care about the threats, because I don't care about the villains, I don't care about the hero's journey. I know that PJ and I have had that conversation offline, but why do I care about you? Because all you're trying to do is sell me a product or get me into the next film when you don't make me care about this movie. It's getting so hard for me to enjoy these films because I don't have anything to latch onto other than, hey, remember X, X, Y, Y, and Z. I'm getting to the point where I don't care. Yeah. And it's taking up my point in the time.
We're getting to a point where I'm remembering scenes now instead of like moments or characters and their motivations. So, and also I want to, I'm afraid I'll forget this point, even though I wrote it down. Sure. Star Wars and Marvel, again, they're so comparable. One, they're the two biggest franchises on the planet. Yeah. Right. But they both have almost the same origins. They're passion projects. They start out very not super corporate. Marvel technically is, but you know what I mean. They're passionate. John Favreau, Robert Downey Jr., and the writers. These were all people. Robert not as much, but these are people who are passionate about the character of Iron Man.
Yeah.
I remember when Iron Man was like a C-list character. Like he wasn't like when he was on the core Avengers, but like people didn't know Tony. They may have knew Iron Man, but people didn't know Tony Stark. John Favreau was like, I have a love for this character, and I want to show you my love for this character. Same with the creators of Hulk. Edward Norton was like, I think this product is good. Let me make sure we fix things to make it work, make it not fall apart. And it makes people remember those things better. And you spread out, and you have a focus and a more auteur approach. Now, what happens? Same thing with Star Wars. We all know the story of Lucas with Star Wars. Now, what happens? They get bought out, so funny enough, by the same company, and they start deluging you, deluge of what they think are these tropes that people love, and you kill it. It's the same story every time. Mom and Pa open a lemonade stand, it gets bought by corporate, and then they put lemonade stands all over every corner, and it's just like, well, it's not special now.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the things that I wanted to really get to on this discussion is that when we came into Batman, and then we started getting the Spider-Man movies, and we got the X movies, and things like that, I said to myself, it's a great time to be a nerd because it was a good time for people who like nerd stuff to go to the movies. And now they've figured out that the people who have the money are the ones who are going to see the movies, and they're wanting to get as much of that money out of you as possible, and they are pulling it out and pulling it out and pulling it out, and they're pulling in as many characters as they can because they're now just hoping something will latch.
And the biggest problem of all that, but that goes back to my point about like we have the control of. I mean, we'd have to en masse stop buying Marvel products of any kind. Yeah, that's what it would come down to.
And it's not just nationwide, worldwide.
Yeah, it would have to be that
certain.
way. Although right now, arguably, China's backed out because the global complex right now. But at the same time, I think that's the biggest problem with movie going in general. We have to wait for something so original that isn't related at all to a superhero movie. Even if it is referenced from some other source material, it's not a comic book. But you wait for movies that grab you that have nothing to do with it so that you can actually have a special experience, which is kind of, it's a good time for movies like Bullet Train to exist.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Northman.
Yeah.
See,
Maverick. Black
I
Phone.
want to push back a little bit on that because I think it's actually a terrible time for those movies to exist because they're not getting
the attention they deserve.
any attention.
You know what? You're right. It's a both and because the more you put these big tentpole movies in there, they push all the other films out and they end up having to show up on streaming services.
Fair point.
Like it's a horror. So I listen to. This is a habit I need to break because I'm one of these wackadoodles that treats YouTube like television and just let it play next. And I don't know where it was from, but it was very clearly Matt Damon discussing about those very unique little movies. So, for example, a movie I know, I believe you and I both like this movie, K-Zach, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah.
You've got that, and you've got movies like The Northman I brought up. These are movies that Hollywood would have been more willing to back because even if they didn't make money in the theater, this is also another cultural thing that kind of shifted why these movies are coming. DVD sales can't back them up anymore because there are none. It's all streaming now.
Yeah.
For sure.
So now the movies have to make the money in the theater. They're getting overshadowed by these big tentpole movies. No one hears about them, and they're lost. So what's a studio exec going to do? Well, logically, like a great movie like The Northman, he's going to say, well, why would I make more of these auteur films when they don't make money? So out it goes. I think this is a really miserable time for original concepts because the original concepts, I feel like it's just the four of us that see them. When I try to talk to people about Northman, let's say Bullet Train or others, no one's heard of them. Like they're just like
Or if they've heard them, they're overshadowed regardless. So,
Yes.
yeah, that's a fair point.
And again, all the tentpole movies are sucking up all the zeitgeist because they exist in online and things like that, and they're the ones that are getting all the news. Stuff like Spider-Man and things like that is pushing out the Northman in your feeds. It's pushing out the Northman in your news. It's pushing out the Northman in discussions on film that while hardcore guys like us consume, the rest of the world isn't, and they don't know it's out there. and there's no way for them to discover it because there's no path to go see it because it doesn't exist in the theater and it gets no marketing on Netflix. How do you know it even exists?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what Scorsese was talking about.
Yeah.
Right, when he brought up the whole idea about cinema is lost, and that he said that superhero films aren't cinema, which pissed off a lot of, but they didn't understand what he was saying by cinema, because you have to look at Scorsese. This guy helped create and was a main figure in cinema when cinema was really starting to show you how well it could be produced, created, written, crafted without CGI, mind you.
Exactly, because
And
you're painting for a bigger canvas,
Yes.
and that was the whole point. That's why something like, I'll tell you, I'm excited for Chris Nolan's next movie, Oppenheimer.
Oh,
the
yeah.
first
Yes.
IMAX movie shot in black and white.
Yep.
Something like that
Really?
shouldn't
Wow.
really be fascinating, but if you love cinema, that's an integral idea right there, just to try it just because you can.
Yes.
And there's a lot of cinema out there, you know, from indie people that are, you know, you're right about it being a very terrible time for original ideas, just from a indie filmmaker or even a screenwriter's perspective. And this is where Hollywood should really be taking notice, because if you keep putting things out there that are where the ideas become the institution and bombard them with that, you have a glut of ideas, original ideas that don't exist. The next generation, the 5-year-old, 6-year-old that's watching Marvel and wants to make movies is probably going to be very rare 20, 30 years from now.
Yes.
Film schools are probably going to have less students in them, less interested in making movies. There's going to be less people trying to write for Hollywood because there's more information out there now about what a challenge that is. If you're in screenwriting right now, the best you can do is write an original concept with the idea of maybe submitting to a festival and maybe winning some awards on it or maybe getting some notice. Use it as a way to show you can write something, but what they're going to assign you to probably is a tentpole to write for.
I do feel this could be nostalgia. I love y'all's take on this, but I just thought of these two random movies that I love that I genuinely can't see them releasing today. All right, modern technology, and that would be a movie like I mentioned, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Let's say Good Will Hunting, or let's say another small movie, but is a great film, Mr. Holland's Opus.
Yes.
Okay, a lot of us have seen that movie.
Dead Poets Society,
Dead Poets Society. Okay,
Awakenings.
Okay.
with De Niro
Dude,
and
I
Robert
miss
Williams.
The Fugitive. Just give me a movie like The Fugitive.
so here's the thing. I think The Fugitive might release today because it's a
maybe,
prior.
maybe not.
They would lean that. But the reason I think like those, I think you were kind of catching what I was throwing there. These were original. They're based on very little. Good Will Hunting is 100%. It's Matt Damon and Ben Affleck sitting in a room writing this, and then they got a shot and they released a fairly at the time big budget, and that movie's incredible.
Yeah.
I don't think that exists today. I don't think that could exist today.
It exists, but it doesn't exist the way we know it because Chris, I mean, you and I can probably talk to this specific point is that we all watched the big films in the 80s because it was all tent poles and things like that because you had the Rockies and you had the Star Wars and things like that. And then we got this huge glut of independent films. It started with the success of things like Clerks and Pulp Fiction and things like that.
Sure.
And then it started delivering a whole bunch of, it delivered a few really good movies, and then it delivered a whole bunch of crap.
Yeah.
It delivered a bunch of and I'm gonna take the South Park quote here. Bunch of gay cowboys eating pudding. We got a lot of those films. We really, really did. And we got guys who wanted to be cinema verite. And then basically at that point, film almost became inaccessible. It almost like if you weren't on this highbrow level, you weren't watching movies. And we started to look for the fun again.
Yeah, exactly. I
and-
think that's that cycle stuff, those waves that we kind of have to ride out, and we're going to have to ride out the superhero one until it becomes more about the next Christopher Nolan out there taking something and giving it some definitive nature or something
Pendulum
like
comeback.
that.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Taylor
Exactly.
Sheridan, who's
Right.
tearing it up both on the big screen and on the small screen with Yellowstone. He's a fantastic writer, and this guy should be given some more to do. But instead, who we're going to get? We're going to get people who the studio says they can control. That's why they didn't want Ava DuVernay to do Black Panther. So they got somebody else who would be willing to just grab that big shot, Ryan Coogler, right? Who's still talented, right? And when you do that, that almost guarantees you're going to continue to produce sameness. because you're looking for the same thing and the same quality and the same types of people, and
To
you want them to come
succeed.
from this one place to succeed.
And look what happened with Edward Norton.
And they can't take challenges like somebody who they can't be creative because they have to worry about that check that they're getting, and this
Yeah.
is their big start.
That's-
That's what
Yeah.
they're counting on.
And what I was saying to Mike's point is that it exists, but it exists on a really small scale because these films aren't getting out to the theaters.
For sure.
Now they're getting out onto the streaming platforms,
Yep.
but they're going on smaller and smaller streaming platforms, and you're not seeing if you're not subscribed.
We don't. There's a timeline. So here's a good. I was just thinking this in my head. Godfather. Okay.
Yep.
That's two. That was a big budget comparatively. It was a huge movie. You release that at any point in existence, it's a hit. Okay. I think I can safely say you release that in theaters today with the acting.
I think you're correct. Here's where I would say no. That movie's very slow. And
It
the way
is, and
people
it's a
watch
soap opera. I'm
films.
You know
sorry.
what? That's
Yeah.
fair. I
It's a
can see
very
that.
slow-paced film. Most people can't watch films that actually slow down and build character. People want to see stuff blowing up every 5 seconds, and they also want to hear everybody quipping. That movie's the antithesis of what's out there today.
You know what? Fair. I can't really push back. My gut feels it would be a big hit, but your point's valid. I can't push back against that. You're not too wrong. But movies that I'm 100% would not exist today, and would just be farted on a streaming service, and no one would see it. Probably like 10 people. Good Will Hunting. Like I said, I keep going back to that movie because that's a movie that I think we've all seen. We all know the quality of the movie, and we know what kind of style that movie is a direct antithesis to what is being released today.
And that movie was released based on the success of who was involved with the project because you had Matt Damon and Ben Affleck who were proving themselves in Hollywood at the time.
Yep.
You had
Up-and-comers.
Kevin Smith as the script doctor on it, and you had Gus Van Sant as the director. All people who were riding on the reputations of what had come 5 years earlier.
Yes. And they had a beloved comedian in Robin Williams who people had seen him do the transition from comedian to actor very well, and so you had to go see him now as a psychologist.
Yeah, because
you
he was
could
playing
almost see
against
that.
type. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And he really knew his craft very well and
Yes,
how to
he did.
deliver it. But to your point about Good Will Hunting, the thing about it is that it's easily dismissible by a shallow culture right now because our culture is. There's depth and shallow. Again, going back to those waves, it happens all the time. Like, for instance, I read the other day about She-Hulk. It's funny how we're talking about it in the context of Marvel fatigue, but apparently the internet and so many of its corridors. I mean, the biggest thing they're talking about is that it's a foot fetish's wet dream.
Yeah, I saw it too. It's a mess that no one's talking about that show's story.
Yeah.
and that's, by the way, that's not people. That's because I argue that show isn't focusing on the story. Matter of fact, another example of this, Miss Marvel. That's a 7-hour show.
Yeah.
What's the one thing anyone talks about? 5 seconds where they mention she's a mutant because they're setting up the next product. No one
Mutants.
talked about
Yeah.
no one talked about what I argue was pretty good characterization of the character. No one talked about the unique cinematography. It's the only Marvel show shot differently. It has unique infographics in it. It's got this unique style to it. No one talks about that because they don't care. There was like just consume and wait for next product. We're using the red letter media meme. I go back to that one because I'm saying I think a lot of it is a lot of an issue I've been having is the writing and the focus on next product or things that aren't the story. So the example I'm going to use is the new Black Widow movie, which I actually forgot about. I haven't thought about the movie in forever. And
Most
I
of those
remember-
films are forgettable.
Well,
Yes.
and sadly, it's a James Bond movie on steroids with a female central character.
Yeah.
Yep.
They really didn't give it any uniqueness, truthfully.
You have
Yeah.
no one who genuinely knows that character. They know they know some of the new directors they have know the movie versions, but you go back to Jon Favreau, you go back to Edgar Wright. Those people knew those characters. They genuinely love, and they wanted you as an audience to feel their passion for that on the screen. The lady who directed Black Widow, who, by the way, I watched her. She seems like a sweetheart. But you know what? To PJ's point, she doesn't look like someone who's going to push back, who's going to say, "I need to do this to fit the story," because that person gets gets canned, a la Edward Norton, who pretty famously was like, "Hey, this movie isn't working in these elements." Because Edward Norton, I didn't get maybe he's a Hulk fan, but he is an auteur. He really does like
Oh,
my
for sure.
name's attached to this.
For
If this
sure.
isn't quality,
Yeah.
it's going to hurt me.
For sure.
So I bring all that up to say I walked out of Black Widow saying it's okay. I didn't care for it that much, and I retroactively hate it when they asked the director about. There's a scene where Black Widow's surrounded by SHIELD agents, and they asked her, well, "Okay, how did she get out of that situation? Like, it's pretty weird. I'm sorry, a no escapable situation." And the director says, "Oh, we couldn't think of a way for her to get out of that situation. We thought it'd be fun to let the audience figure out in their head." how to get out."
Yeah. So let me kind of bring this back to the discussion because I want to bring it back to Marvel fatigue.
Yeah.
Is that there was nothing in that Black Widow movie that made me want to learn about Black Widow, the comic book character.
Thank you.
There was no when I started feeling Marvel fatigue was Doctor Strange. There was nothing in Benedict Cumberbatch's production of it that made me want to read more about Doctor Strange. And I mean, that man's a pillar of Marvel, even though he's a B-list, C-list character at best at the time. There's nothing in when I saw Guardians of the Galaxy and I saw James Gunn's interpretation of it, I was interested in the characters. I was interested in going back to see it and going back to hear more about it. I wanted to connect to the superheroes more, and I was willing to go back to the books. That's a big thing that's causing me Marvel fatigue, is that there's nothing in there that makes me want to go back and read about the heroes, which was the original reason why I wanted to go see the comic book movies in the first place, was because I wanted to like the comics.
Well, and on top of that, if you look at the source of Marvel Comics from those points, where all these movies are referencing, 20, 30 years worth of storytelling, and they've caught up to a certain point. Now they're trying to leap into beyond and catch up with the last, probably arguably 25 years.
Yeah.
But what they forget is that a movie is not a comic book, and back then, even the comic books, they were oversaturating the comic book newsstands. Plus, they're alienating the core audience that they have grown into. They're making these movies and these comic books for adult comic book collectors or consumers of this content, from the last 40 years, and alienating the kids along the way. I mean, the onus of introducing any of these characters is really on us as adults to pass it on to our kids. But there's nothing for the kids out there now. Arguably,
There's pop figurines.
well,
Yeah, Funko Pops. That
and,
connects
Marvel,
us all.
and Disney XD has Marvel, TV shows for the kids that are, entertaining at, various age levels. But I think that's the idea at its core, and what was so great about a movie like Superman the movie back in 1978 is that it made you feel like a kid again. And if they can't tap
Right.
into that
There
feeling
you go. There you go.
with these characters
Yeah.
to make us care about them, regardless of whether or not we go back to the source material,
Right.
there's no point. If you don't make us care about the character just from what we see on the front cover of a comic book, which is hard.
Yes.
It's very hard. We know people who make comic books for a living, and they'll tell you how hard that is, how to make it attractive, how to make it engaging. What we're talking about at its core is engagement. And it almost makes me wish that we were like the focus group that from behind a mirror or something that Kevin Feige was watching, because maybe him, Dan Lin, who's supposed to be taking up the mantle for DC's, heading up DC's film and television, these are the people you need to be listening to, guys, because, in about, 30 seconds, which in Hollywood time is like roughly 10 years, you're going to be out of money. You're going to be out of people who want to pay the money and hunker down the cash to subscribe or to go to the theater.
It's about to be diminishing returns, and he brought up a point where he realized, I'm getting tired of this, because even the movies that were, I remember walking out through the Dark World, and I was like, "Whoa, boy, that was awful." It wasn't. Oh, maybe yell that. Sorry.
No, it was awful. You're right.
Yeah,
No, it's awful.
It's an awful film. And I remember walking out of it, my initial thought this is a problem with Marvel yet. It was like, what a weird fluke that was. I'm sure the next one will be okay. I even in my mind was like, I'm pretty sure when they're going to listen to criticisms with Thor and they're going to make the next one will be better than this. I was very optimistic, all right, for them going forward, because they had a record of authorship might be the wrong word, but I did feel more of the passion, more of the building up these characters for the adventures they're going on.
Yeah.
By the time you get to Age of Ultron, I'm like, what are we doing? Like, this is becoming a mental beatdown. And by that point, I felt we were all locked in. We were just like, well, let's see how the Thanos that let me see how this ends now, because we're very clearly by this point we know we're doing a overarching story arc. Now I do think they landed. I think that Endgame's a pretty. It's not great. I mean, it's not the greatest film I've ever seen, but it's an incredible. So actually, I think Infinity War is the better film.
I'd agree.
True, but honestly, one cannot exist without the other. And
Agreed,
and that's the
100%.
biggest problem with Marvel in general. The
that's-
others can't exist without the other. But you do bring up a great point about there's been peaks and valleys. When they're going through Iron Man 2, as much as I love that movie and still think it's pretty entertaining,
Got a lot of problems.
it is not their best.
No.
Neither is Age of Ultron. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Age of Ultron since seeing it in the theater.
Yeah.
And that's I feel I was much more forgiving of those movies, mediocrity and or bad, in those movies than I am now. I am so tired of it because it's like you don't learn the lesson. It's one thing if someone messes up the first time, it's a mistake. But if you keep doing it, it means you're not listening to anybody. You're not learning.
Sure.
You're not
Sure.
growing.
Now, I had an inkling that this would be bad because, well, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, the third one, that showed me superhero movies can be done really bad, even though you have somebody who knows and loves the character and this sort of thing, right? So when these films started coming out, the MCU, for me it started to happen with I think Dark World was the warning shot. I was like, okay, Thor's changed. In the first movie, he was serious. He was the guy that was a fish out of water. Now he's a jokester, and he's starting to do all this stuff. I'm like, I don't like where you're taking this character because this is not who he is.
It's like
at
hints
all.
of it in that movie.
You can see it, yes.
Hints,
Oh,
yes.
it's in there. There's a lot of jokes in there. Before he
Oh,
does
yeah.
something, he's throwing a lot of
You're
jokes
right.
out, and I thought, that's kind of weird. And Iron Man 3 sealed it for me. When they did that whole switcheroo with the villain and everything like that and all that stuff, and I was like, so all this is happening because the dude was upset that he didn't just say something that he needed him to say when he was in school with this guy on a ledge looking over the balcony. That's his motivation. I thought, that's the best we can do now. And then you're going to make the real villain not who you think he is, but you have to watch a short to understand, was he really the villain or was he not? When you get an actor like Kingsley,
Yeah.
you don't waste Kingsley with stuff like that. When I started seeing the decisions and the choices there, I was like, this is kind of going away from me. And then they kind of brought us back with Guardians of the Galaxy. I was like, okay, that's fun again. All right, I like that. But they kept showing, we're looking for the formula. We're looking for the formula. And then when they locked in on it, now everybody's funny. Everybody's over. And I'm like, okay, that dissolves the tension because, see, in real life, people run into struggle. And that's why we watch, because we want to see how they do it. In sports, you want to know, how is that guy going to run that ball back with all these guys on the field? How is that guy going to hit that one home run that his team needs to win the game, and he's on last at bat, and he's got 2 strikes and 2 balls, and he's got one more pitch coming, right? We watch because we want to go, what are they going to do? We get drawn into good characterizations. Why Marvel fatigue is hard for me is that's what's not accentuated in these movies. What's accentuated in these movies is the action set pieces, how many more superheroes you can have fighting on the screen at the same time, which starts to look like a video game at a certain point. And then when they do slow it down, you don't believe it. When they show someone crying because someone died, because you know they're going to come back, they're not really dead.
And I want to go ahead and bring out one more point on all this is that what we're getting with a lot of this content, I went to go see Love and Thunder yesterday. It was a nothing burger. She-Hulk is a nothing burger. There is nothing in there. I mean, it's cute to see them. I'm laughing in all the right places, but dear God, I don't care.
Well, and we shouldn't be surprised by that because by the time you get to Batman Forever or Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, this has happened historically
Yes, it has.
over and over again.
Exactly.
It's history, man.
And the same thing happened in the music industry, right? When Kiss started to produce all those extra toys and everything of them, they died. Everybody loved them when they were black and silver. And then the moment in Dynasty and then into the 80s where they started putting all the color into the uniforms and then kids started coming and started to become a circus act. And even the members of Kiss, Ace said it. He's like, that's when we lost what we started as a hard rock and roll band, a heavy metal Beatles is what they were saying that they were trying to do in the beginning. But the moment they became all things to all people because of all the merchandising and all the Kiss stuff that they were selling, they were making more money off that at certain points than they were actually doing some of the shows because people had started to move into disco. And so guys in suits and boots with makeup on, what does that have to do with disco or hard rock music? That was coming in, the early metal phase that was starting to come in with Dokken and Dio and all of those guys really were starting to say, no, this is what metal looks like. Not that hard rock Beatles that they said they were. What even is that? Right? So you've seen this evidence everywhere where whatever goes up must come down. And Marvel's basically saying, nope, we can stay up forever because we have the formula. Therefore, keep applying the formula in the doses. You must. And so they're going to do it because it makes money. And so until we, as you said earlier, start to say, no, I'm fatigued, I'm out. I'm not going to watch this just so I can be able to have a conversation with somebody in a comic book shop about the latest show. Because that's the fatigue I also have, is everybody comes up to me knowing that I read comic books, I love comic books, love all kinds of movies. Have you seen the new so-and-so and so-and-so yet? No, I didn't realize it was a requirement that I had to watch it.
Yeah, and that's another thing is that you have to be first online. You have to be first online to see it. You have to be first online to make the remark, to make the snappy quip.
Either you got to be in the water cooler talk, so to speak. You want to be in the conversation. That's another thing that Marvel has built. I'll give them credit on that. They did build that FOMO of it. Like, if you don't buy in to see these Marvel movies, you don't want to be left out. Yeah,
I would argue the internet built that
I
over
would too.
cinema in general. It's not just Marvel, but Marvel certainly contributed a hell of a lot to it. That's for sure. But I think that water cooler stuff, that stuff's still,
it's always
going to be there.
Yeah. So I'm not criticizing so much the water cooler talk element.
Sure.
I criticize really playing into that, and then on top of that, the requirement, the multiverse of madness was. I'm really bad with analogies, but I'll just say it felt like a shot across the bow. I was like, is this where we're going with these movies? That because you can't force me, they don't force me anything. I'm not gonna use that word. You can't ask of me to watch all of your things, and then they don't get played up or mentioned. I mean, in She-Hulk, they finally have mentioned an Eternal coming out of the planet. That seems big to me, and I feel like in Phase 1 and 2, multiple movies would be dealing with that or commenting on the fact there's a deity coming out of a planet right now. We have so much right now, no one's even discussed that. Like, that's an issue with the storytelling and the world structure. We have Sam Raimi saying, I didn't even watch WandaVision. So then why was I told that I had to watch it?
Right. And you know what's funny is some of that stuff was coming out as soon as Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Ego was a planet.
Yes.
I mean, so that whole idea of a deity coming out of a planet, I think those seeds were being sown well before that. But again, to your point, all that world building, all that connective tissue that Marvel was famous for is now kind of unraveling on them in their storytelling for all the reasons we've talked about here.
Sure.
So, because I didn't care about Eternals. I think it was a serviceable movie. I also think it was undercut by its own machine in many ways in terms of the marketing. Plus, there was some political stuff going on at the Oscars for the director, Chloe Zhao, at the time, I believe. But, or the film had just opened just prior, and now either she won the Oscar before that movie opened or it was after. I'm messing the timeline up, but somewhere near to that time. And it's interesting because she was vocally outspoken against her own country, where most of box office revenue for Marvel has been coming. China. So Eternals was never going to open in China, so it was already kind of cut off at its own knees from the beginning. But I don't care about it because they gave me something where the characters aren't. I mean, it tried to create an Avengers without giving you all that setup with prior movies.
There's no. I'm gonna pick and choose my battles because there's you can have another video on just the problems with Eternals.
Yeah.
But look at what was the most successful across the board that we all enjoyed when we saw it. I think KZak wasn't as enthused about it. Was No Way Home. Now, yes, there's some remember berries in that movie, but that's just a strong story.
It is a strong story, and it legitimized two previous franchises.
I argue that even if it had been like Into the Spider-Verse, where it had been brand new Spider-Man, that movie is still a strong movie because of the performance of its villains and its setup.
Exactly. Yeah, right. It's the performances in that movie that make it count, that made it basically have gravity, because you had people who were who were back to put passion into the project.
Sure. So in that convergence of time, because even when we're having fun, time flies really fast. And I don't know if we. I mean, we still have to talk about what we've seen. I don't really care if we do, but if we have to, then we will.
It'll be quick. It'll be
we'll get it. So let me get to this. All right. So we've seen it. It's well documented. Thank you, because you gentlemen have highlighted it very, very well. So if we move to the other side, which is, okay, if we see these problems, then what can we say if we were going to go and advise Marvel? Like Marvel said, we're going to go ahead and get some consultants to help us with what's going forward. Then what would you say? What we could say would be a fix to all this stuff that we're doing, and just kind of give me something that you think would be something that would be one thing they could fix.
Slow down and pay attention to the writing.
Love it.
100%. A variation of that. Character focused, and stop stop setting up next product in the movie itself.
Sure.
Post credit scenes, have fun. I'm tired of seeing it. You focus on the story itself in the story. It's 100% what you're saying.
Yep.
I'm going to legitimize my reference to The Fugitive earlier. When they were making that movie, they were the producers were arguing with Harrison Ford over, well, we got to do something for the sequel. Harrison Ford, quote, said, "Fuck the sequel."
Yep.
Don't worry about, take what's there and build on it if you can.
Right.
But focus on the story you got in front of you.
Yep.
With your characters.
And because they don't, that's why they don't have a story. Kazak, what can they do to improve it? If we're talking to Marvel, they hired us as the outside consultants coming in.
Get people who care about the stuff to make the movies.
Yep. Yeah.
Get them to care about the villains. Get them to care about the story, the structure, the history of it. You go get yourself a Dave Filoni to make a Star Wars. Get yourself someone who cares about the product to make the films. The reason why there are parts in Spider-Man 3 that work. It's the parts that the studio forced on Sam Raimi that didn't, which threw the whole thing.
We all agree.
For certain. We all would agree with that. And I would simply say when Scorsese talks, or anyone talks who was there in the golden age and building the best movies, you should listen.
Hell yeah.
And rather than saying, oh, he's just having sour grapes about whatever. No, that guy knows what cinema is. He's made some very, very important films. And sadly, The Irishman was going to get pushed down just because of all the other films that were coming out, but that's a good film as well. So I would say, to me then, we're the consultants coming in Marvel. Thank you. You've done some great stuff. You've had some great ideas. You've planned out some things wonderfully. You had some hit and misses. Everybody does that. However, if we're talking about where we're going to go forward, these films need to be transformative now.
Yes.
Not just informative. They need to be transformative. And how do you transform? I would tell every last one of them, go back and watch E.T. Go back and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. Go back and watch Aliens. Go watch The French Connection. I can give you a list of films. They're out there. And the films that are listed in the Academy of the greatest films of all time, just go sit down like what we do when we go to a theater, have no other people in there, and just see what you see. And then you'll be able to see the contrast between what we're doing now versus what was doing then. Because back then, it was character development. It was story, not CGI fight set pieces first, and then we'll figure out how to make these people cry in a certain scene in the movie. If you can do that, I think you can have an opportunity, Marvel, and any other superhero film that's going to come out and follow some sort of deal, because we know it's a copycat league out there. Go back and see what people really loved about film in the first place, and then see if you can replicate that.
Amen.
All right. So with topic B, we're just going to get into this just briefly, gentlemen. What have you watched that's worth mentioning here lately? And we'll start with you, Mike.
Living up to the old name here, Horror Mike. I watched a horror movie yet again. Didn't even know it existed. My dad asked me had I seen it. And I'm shocked because this is it co-stars a mutual favorite actress of you and I, me and Vega Bombers. This movie is called The Cursed. Came out last year, 2021. Starring Kelly Riley from Yellowstone.
Yeah.
And Boyd Holbrook. I know him most from Logan. He was recently in the Sandman show.
He was in Predators, actually.
He was in Predators.
No, The Predator.
The Predator.
The Predator.
And is a story of a group of gypsies left. They come back home. They have a deed to a land. A bunch of people stole it from them, and they murder this poor group. And before they die, they curse these people, and they're being attacked by a creature. And they bring in Boyd Holbrook's character to kind of figure out what's going on and why. How can we get rid of this curse? This is an incredible movie. I recommend it to every single one of you. Like, even if you don't like horror, this is the one. The only person I wouldn't recommend it to, it does get a little bit gory. But I do think this is a great movie.
Excellent. Chris, how about you? What's worth watching that you've seen lately?
I'm going to say one weekend I saw 3 movies, and one weekend 2 in the theater, which was nice because I haven't done that in a while.
That's nice.
But the one on Hulu, the one that got my attention was Prey. It's a Predator sequel, the 5th Predator film. But oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually saying it. It's the first good Predator sequel. And it's got gorgeous photography.
How dare you besmirch Danny Glover?
Sorry.
Yeah,
But
I like Predator too, but he's right.
well, I love Predator 2 as well, and there's parts of the others that are really, really great. But this one doesn't worry about. It does extend the mythos as well as those other sequels do, but it makes you care about the main characters and their situation first.
Right.
Gorgeous cinematography, really solid music score that isn't beholden to what Alan Silvestri did in that first movie. Now, is it the same plot of it's the Predator hunting us as game, right? Yeah, that's there.
That's fine.
But then it does go a different direction because it makes you follow this female indigenous person who is trying to prove herself to her own tribe and prove herself as a hunter herself. And that's where the movie is really shining. Plus, the guy who directed it, Dan Trachtenberg, he directed 10 Cloverfield Lane, which I think is the best of the Cloverfield movies.
Agreed.
Because he did the same thing there. He made you care about the character. And it felt like in that situation where something was tacked on. Not so much in Prey. The Predator isn't tacked on. In fact, the Predator you see is a different looking creature, which is fine because this is hundreds of years earlier than the events of the 1987 first film.
It's a prequel.
Yes.
It is. It's in some ways a prequel, but in and of itself, it's its own entity. You don't have to see the other films to enjoy it, and it's lean, efficient. It's a good 90 minutes. You don't have to worry about investing yourself beyond it if you don't need to. And it's got a kick-ass performance by the lead actress.
Okay.
Kick-ass performance.
It's
Okay.
like we were saying in the Marvel movies. This movie does fan service, but it's not the focus.
Exactly.
Okay, Zach.
All right, my recommendation this week is a documentary on Shudder, and it's called "This Is Gwar." This is the documentary of a band that has been together for 30 years. They're not just a band; they're an art collective, and they're a group of guys who've basically been making a combination of heavy metal music and sci-fi and horror, and mixing it all together in a weird He-Man stage show. And if you're a heavy metal fan, you know this band. If you're a Beavis and Butthead fan, you know this band. But it's a fun documentary because it not only takes a look at the trials and tribulations of a band, but also the creative process. It takes a look at an art collective. It takes a look at what happens when your band falls into tragedy because they lost their lead singer. They go through a whole lot of the creative process and just what it takes to keep this thing going successfully and enjoyable as it has for 30 years. They still pack them into stages and clubs and crowds doing what they do, which is, and it touches on issues like censorship, and it touches on issues like what's offensive and things like that. It gets into a really, it's kind of a microcosm for creative processes in and of itself. So as a guy who liked the band, who liked what they did, and of course liked just basically is interested in the creative process, it's a good place to go.
Yeah, love it.
And PJ, what do you have this week?
I didn't see anything because this is titled "What's Something That's Worth Recommending or Watching." I didn't see anything new that I thought would be worthy of me telling you. There is a video sitting on my entertainment system called Rad that I'm going to watch because I got it for my birthday from that guy.
Basically you got nothing.
Because Rad is a 1980s like BMX movie, right?
Yes, it is. And I used to be a BMXer back in that time. So for me, there wasn't anything that was super compelling. And once again, Marvel fatigue, yes, don't join. DJ, they call me PJ. DJ, don't join. I'm not going to watch anything that have to be manipulated to watch because people are telling me I have to consume. I will not do that. That's not how I watch movies.
It's like John Carpenter's They Live, consume, obey. It makes you wonder if maybe during the Marvel logo, that's really supposed to be what's there.
Awesome. They sneak it in there. It's just
right. Real quick, obey.
Yeah.
So let's get into our shout outs. And so, Chris, who are you shouting out? Who do you want to say thanks to this morning?
Thanks to my loving wife and son for letting me come down here on an early Sunday morning.
Awesome. Dig it.
My usual mom, dad. I know they try to watch every episode. Keith's Comics, my manager, Jesus, and Garrett. I know he tries to tune in every episode. So thank you guys, and Vega Bomber, you man.
Yes,
It's always fun bringing you
yes.
You
down.
bet. I'm glad you guys can. I'm glad you guys can come down. I love talking movie with you guys. Kazak, who are you shouting out to?
As usual, we're shouting out everyone here on DallasOnAir.com. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, we've got a lot of great stuff here, including our sister shows that will air on opposite Sundays. That's the Rancor Pit and Isle of Toys. Sadly, we won't be bringing you Isle of Toys this month. We've had a little issue with Cole. We weren't able to bring you our show today, but we will be back with another episode next month. And of course, the Rancor Pit Live. We'll continue to watch Star Wars. We'll continue to talk toys, all that good stuff. And of course, check out everything else here on DallasOnAir.com. We're really grateful to Jedi and Cat. And by the way, happy birthday, Jansen!
Jansen!
Happy
glad to have you.
birthday!
We're glad that
Birthday.
you give us a home here every Sunday. But do check out all the great stuff here on DallasOnAir.com. You can check out it's the ADD show. You can check out. Phantom Life. Check out Say Something. Check out all the great stuff here on DallasOnAir.com. There's something here for you to tune into.
Absolutely. And I just want to give a shout out to you, the folks that are watching. And there's been several of you coming in and out. And thank you for being there and watching us go through all the different transitions and co-hosts and all that stuff. But it's real TV. It's real life, right? So I want to thank Barry and Brandy Austin for watching, Sean Presley, Lauren Wiedauer, Tristan Frazier, Harry Thomas. Thank you, Harry. Troy Ross, Daniel May's a really good friend. Freddie, who was actually on one of the shows talking with us. Eddie Medina, Cole Houston, who you mentioned from Isle of Toys, and the Rancor Pit, Stephanie Crane. And of course, I have to give a shout out to one of the original OGs, the film samurai himself, Carlos Salinas. And so with that, we're the FulFILMment crew. Those are our special contributors. We will see them again. And for now, we're just telling you, we'll see you when we talk again.
Sayonara.